I want to invite you to Hebrews chapter 10, if you'll open there, please. Hebrews, the 10th chapter this morning. We're missing a lot of folks today. We got about 30% of our people, looks like, are out of town. Hebrews 10 and verse 23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. I want us to see in that text the purpose that the Holy Spirit describes for us of our coming together, of our habit of coming together as a people. He uses in verse 25 the word encouraging one another, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. You know, our purpose in coming together today, our purpose in assembling together as a people, I should say one purpose that's a part of our coming together, is the purpose of encouragement. And I want you to see what the elements of encouragement are as they're defined in the verse prior to verse 24. Verse 25. What he says in verse 24. Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. Notice verse 25 is the explanation of that. He starts with the instruction, let us consider how to stimulate each other to love and good deeds, not forsaking our assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. If I could define what encouragement is, it's what's said in verse 24. To stimulate each other to love and to good deeds. That's a good definition of what encouragement is. Part of my purpose in coming together with you today is that I can consider how, I can think about. Do you see the intellectual part of that? Considering. I need to give some thought. And then I need to give some will to the choice. Consider how to provoke you. I've got a job to provoke you today. But provoke you in two ways. To stimulate or to provoke you to love and to good deeds. To having the right kind of motivation and to having the right kind of behavior. But that's not a one-way thing. It's not just my purpose, my responsibility to stimulate you to having a right kind of motivation and a right kind of behavior. That's also your responsibility to me. You're to provoke me to love and to good deeds. You're to encourage me to those things. And likewise, we have that responsibility to each other. We have a mutual responsibility when we come together to encourage one another. And that means to provoke each other to love, to the right kind of motivation, and to the right kind of behavior, to love and to good deeds. In a growing congregation, that's especially important that we stay on purpose, that we stay on mission with that regard, in that regard. With new people that happen to be amongst us as we assemble, it's important that we stay on purpose, that we stay on mission with encouraging one another to love and good deeds. As new people become a part of us as a people, we all need to embrace that mission together, whether you have been here a long time or whether you're brand new here. We all have that common purpose and that common mission, the mission that God has given us as a people to help each other grow. If I could use another synonym for what encouragement is about, it is about spiritual growth. That's provoking each other to love, to having the right kind of motivation toward God and toward men, and the right kind of behavior toward God and men. Love, he says, and good works. Now, I want us to go to Acts, the 4th chapter, because we find in our New Testament a model of someone who did that very well. Look, if you would, with me at Acts chapter 4 and begin with me in verse 34 of that context. Acts 4, verse 34. Concerning the church at Jerusalem, it says that there was not a needy person among them, for all who were owners of land or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sales and lay them at the apostles' feet, and they would be distributed to each as any had need. And Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles, which translated means son of encouragement, and who owned a tract of land, sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Here was a brother in the church at Jerusalem who was so good at encouragement, who was so good at provoking others to love and to good works, that he was given a nickname of an encourager. He was called the son of encouragement. Barnabas was his nickname. Joseph was his given name. Barnabas was the nickname that was given him by the apostles because he was so skilled and so busy in the work of encouraging those that were disciples there. And so if we want someone that would be a good mentor for us, someone to learn from about the skill of encouragement, Barnabas is a good example to look at. Could I ask you, what kind of fellow was Barnabas? Do you reckon he was an extrovert, or do you think he was an introvert? Which was it? Was he just a naturally outgoing person? Or was he someone that perhaps was more introverted, more deliberate in his action? Maybe not, which do you think he was? I don't know which he was. But I can tell you that we can have a flawed perspective about what it means to be an encourager, that an encourager is someone who's just a people person. I mean, just someone who is outgoing and bubbly, but that's not the biblical concept of what it means to be an encouragement. When Hebrews 10 verse 25 commands us to encourage one another, and when it describes in verse 24 that we're to consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, he's not commanding us to have a certain kind of personality. He's saying something about our character. And so you can be an introvert and be an encourager. You can be an extrovert and you can be an encourager. But you can be an extrovert and be bubbly and be outgoing, but your bubbliness and your outgoingness can be all about you, right? And you can be an introvert and your introversion, not connect to people, not look outside yourself. But the thing about being an encourager is that is a mark of character, where you do look outside yourself, and where you do connect to people, but not for your glory and not to impress them with who you are and with what your gifts are, but for the purpose of stimulating them to love and to good deeds. And so I don't know whether Barnabas was an introvert or whether he was an extrovert. I just know that he was an encourager, and that he was so purposeful about the way that he encouraged that he was given a nickname for doing so. He was called the son of encouragement. And there's some great things that we can learn from him about the skill of being an encouragement, and some of those things I want us to consider together today. The first thing that I want us to note is what it says about the origin of Barnabas in Acts chapter 4, because this is an important principle if you're going to be an encourager. Look at what it says. Look at what the Holy Spirit says to us in verse 36 of Acts 4, when it says that Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles, which translated means son of encouragement. I just want you to notice where Joseph was born, or Barnabas was born. He was born on the island of Cyprus. If you were to look on a map in the back of your Bible, you would see Cyprus, this little sliver of an island that's up in the north and west of Palestine, just off the coast in the Mediterranean Sea. But when we are introduced to Barnabas or Joseph here in Acts chapter 4, he's not on the island. He's in the city of Jerusalem. But as we read further in the New Testament, we find out that Barnabas doesn't stay in Jerusalem. He ends up moving to another city, the third largest city in the world in his time, the city of Antioch, to go there and preach. Joseph is a Levite. He is someone very acquainted with things that are clean and things that are unclean, having come from a tribe that was involved with sacrifice in the Old Testament. And Joseph, a Levite from the island of Cyprus, leaves Jerusalem, a place where a priest would love to live, and he goes to Antioch so that he can go preach to people that are unclean, to Gentiles. Now, the lesson that I want you to see in these movements of Barnabas, because he doesn't even stay at Antioch, he leaves there to go preach to the world. Barnabas is always moving places. He's always moving from places that are very comfortable to places that are very awkward for him. He leaves an island existence to come and live in Jerusalem. He leaves Jerusalem to go teach in Antioch. He leaves Antioch to go and travel around with Paul and with others to preach the gospel to the world. And the lesson that I want you to see in that's an important part, if you're going to be an encourager, if I'm going to be an encourager, is this. We have to get off the island. We have to leave the island. We have to leave the island of our own comfort. We have to leave the island of our own comfortable existence. It'd be kind of nice to live on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, wouldn't it? Balmy weather, under the palm trees, soaking up the sun, sitting on the sand, your toes in the water. But Barnabas left that to go and be with people. To go and be with people that God was purposing to save and that God was purposing to grow. And he didn't stay just with people he was comfortable with. He went and he connected to people that were awkward for him to connect with Gentiles, with people that his whole life he'd been taught were unclean. He went to the third largest city in the world to go and do that. That would be very uncomfortable, where he was a minority. And yet he was always leaving his comfortable existence to get awkward for God's purposes. I want all of us to hear this, because it doesn't matter where you are in your growth. It's so important that you hear this. If we're not uncomfortable, we're probably not growing. If you stay in your comfort zone, your comfort zone of what you know, how much you know about the Word right now. If you stay in your comfort zone with how much you serve, if you stay in your comfort zone, do you see that's a sign that I'm relaxing. The awkward zone is where we grow. Jesus was all the time pushing his disciples into situations that were awkward for them. And all of that challenged their faith. It challenged what they presently knew. It challenged their hearts about what they were giving. Now, and he was always doing that because that was helping them grow. So I want you to think about where you are right now. And I want you to think about where you are right now in the work of encouragement. Because we can stay just connected to the people that we already know. And to the circle of people that are comfortable for us. But I want to beg you to stretch. I want to beg you to you don't have to jump in over your head, but could you just walk in the water up to your ankles and get off the island? Could you just wade into where you're knee deep? Just waist deep. But just get a little awkward for the purpose of provoking someone else to love and to good deeds. It all starts, it's going to be awkward whether you're a people person or whether you're not, whether you're an introvert or whether you're an extrovert. Whichever zone you're in, whichever one of those personalities is yours, I want you to see that encouragement is an attribute of character. And so would you leave your island? Would you get awkward for God's sake so that he can grow you and he can grow someone else? A second principle that I want you to see that we learned from Barnabas about what it means to be an encourager is taught, if you would go with me to Acts the 9th chapter, Acts chapter 9, and we see it modeled by Barnabas here. Look at Acts 9 and verse 26. This is a story about Saul, who will later be known as the Apostle Paul. And he's been a persecutor of Christians, but he's been converted. Earlier, the story is told in Acts chapter 9 about him becoming a Christian. And guess how the Christians in Jerusalem felt about Paul when he came and wanted to worship with them? He put some of their number in jail. Some people died because of the persecution of Paul. Because of him, Stephen was stoned, people went to jail, families were divided. And in verse 26, it says that when he, that is Paul or Saul, had come to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples, and they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the disciples and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road and that he had talked to him and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. And he was with them, moving about freely in Jerusalem, speaking out boldly in the name of the Lord. Now, how did that transition happen from Saul not being with them to him being with them the way that it says in verse 28? Who made the difference there? Who was the difference maker? It's Barnabas. And what skill does he teach us there? Here is Saul, and he's an outsider. People are afraid of Saul. People are afraid to connect to him. People are afraid to make him a part of their number. And Barnabas comes along, and what does it say about him? It says, verse 27, he took hold of him and brought him to the apostles. Now, the skill that I want you to see that Barnabas teaches us there about being an encourager is this simple skill. It's a skill of building a bridge. Here was someone that was isolated. Here was someone that was over here, and there is this rift between him and the people. He's on the fringe. He's not connected. And so what Barnabas does is he builds a bridge between Paul, who's not connected, and the people to whom he needs to be connected. Now, does that connection, does it bless Paul? It blesses Paul because he's connected to people that he needs to be connected to in order for him to grow, in order for him to be helped. But does it just help Paul? Does it help the church too? Sure does. Because when Paul is among them, then Paul becomes a teacher. Paul is going into the temple, and he's going in the synagogue, and he's preaching, and he has support from the people. And so there's a way in which that becomes a mutual blessing. We need to see the value in building bridges to people. When there are folks among us that are on the fringe, is that good for them? Who's it good for? Is it good for them? Is it good for folks to be disconnected? It is not. It's not good for us. And is it good for the rest of us when folks are on the fringe? No, because we're not being blessed by what it is that God has equipped them with, what gifts they have, what blessings they bring, what ways that they can help us in our growth. It's not good for either one of us, either for when we're on the fringe or for the group that's not benefited by that connection. And Barnabas became the cure in a situation where he saw someone that was on the fringe, and he built a bridge so that now there was closeness, now there was connection. And he risked his own credibility to make that happen. Folks didn't know Saul, they didn't know his story, they didn't know the changes that had happened in his life. Barnabas got to know him, and Barnabas created a bridge. And when you have a bridge, you see there can be intercourse. When there's a bridge, there can be exchange. When there's a bridge, there's communication, there's travel. There's things happen when there's a connection. You can get from this isolated piece of land to this other territory. Good things can happen when there's bridges. And so we need to be about the work of building bridges ourselves. So find someone on the fringe and build a bridge to them. Learn the value that they have and that they bring to the Lord's purposes. Get them enfolded. Get them, embrace them, and help others embrace them. And help them embrace. Barnabas did that with Saul. He did it with John Mark. He did it with the Christians that were in Antioch. He was always building bridges. And we need to learn to be bridge builders. That will make us, and it will make others, a blessing when we learn that great skill. I want you to see one of the ways that Barnabas built a bridge. Look, if you would, closely with me at verse 27 again, and look at how Barnabas built the bridge. Barnabas took hold of him, brought him to the apostles, and look at what it says next, and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road, and that he had talked with him, and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. Here's the way that Barnabas built a bridge between Saul and the people there. Barnabas told Saul's story to the Christians there. It wasn't Saul that told his story about how he had seen the Lord on the Damascus road and how he had spoken out in the name of the Lord in Damascus. Barnabas learned the story of Saul, and now he's telling it. He's recommending him. He really did get to know Saul so that he could talk about him to others. And that's an encouraging way. And here's the skill that's involved in learning someone's story and telling it on them. Spread good gossip. Spread good gossip is the skill that Barnabas illustrates for us here. People like to hear things about other people, right? Isn't that what gossip is? Except in our day, gossip has it has an undercurrent of sensationalism, is it? It's something that is juicy. It is something that is that's scandalous. It's telling something bad on someone. I'm talking about telling something good on someone, not telling something bad on them. And that's the thing that Barnabas learned to do. That's the way of an encourager. So he knew Saul's story, and he's telling Saul's story, and that's part of how he's helping to build credibility between Saul and other people, is by telling Saul's story. One of the best ways that you can encourage a man, you can compliment him, but instead of complimenting him, why not say something to his wife? Do you see the difference there? You reckon she's going to tell him? She will. And when she does, do you see that you've encouraged two people? Because you've encouraged him, but you've also encouraged her at the same time. Or tell their children about what a great mom and dad they have. And be specific when you share that kind of compliment. And then you've blessed an entire family. When you know that people are talking about you, I mean that might be, you might be worried about that, but when you know that people are telling something good on you, that's an encouraging thing. And that's what happens. That's what happens to Saul, is that Barnabas talks about him, and he knows the good things that Barnabas is saying about him, and that's an encouraging way. And when people find out that you're talking about them, but when you're telling something good on them, that is a great way. That is a great way to encourage. I'm afraid sometimes we don't brag enough on one another. That we don't tell the good things that we know about what one another are up to, about the good things that one another are doing in the kingdom. And sometimes I'm afraid that we take it upon ourselves the responsibility to make sure that we keep everyone humble. You know, I don't want to tell the good thing that you're doing, because your head might get all big, and you might get proud and lose your soul. Well, it's not my job to keep you humble. That's your job, to keep you humble. It's my job to be your encourager. And I am not talking about flattery. I'm not talking about that we build each other up so that we have some kind of fatal flaw of character, or building one another up for the sake of manipulating or just of flattery. I'm talking about provoking each other to love and to good deeds. To speaking words that are genuine, but speaking words that are intended to fill, that are intended to inspire, that are intended to motivate, that are intended to edify, to grow people's character. Barnabas did that well. And one of the ways that he did that well was by the business of spreading good gossip, by broadening someone's influence, by telling something good on them. Go back, if you would, to Acts chapter 4. And I want you to see something else in the text there that is the sign of an encourager. Go back to Acts chapter 4 and look with me again at verse 36. When we're first introduced to Barnabas, we're introduced to him in the context of this charitable gift that was being collected for those that were needy among the saints there at Jerusalem. And so Barnabas is noted to us because of his particular example in responding to this benevolent need. And so it says that Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas, verse 37, who owned a tract of land, sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. One of the ways that Barnabas noted himself here is by his generosity. It was by his servant disposition. Is that encouraging when you see someone else being a servant? It is encouraging when you see someone else showing generosity. Does that motivate you to want to be generous too? Does it motivate you to want to be a servant when you've experienced service from someone else? Or motivate you to want to join in when you see someone else showing, when you see them washing feet, or in this case, selling property in order to help someone that was in need? Well, sure it is. And one of the ways that you and I can encourage is by doing what Barnabas modeled here, in that he was leading the line to lend a hand. Here was this benevolent need, and Barnabas is in the front of the pack. I mean, he is rushing to give aid, to give assistance. He's leading the file here to lend his assistance to someone else. Now, the point of that, of leading the line to lend a hand, is not that I don't have to be first every time there's a need, or it's not for me to be in front. But the point of leading the line to lend a hand is to communicate to someone else that serving them, that showing kindness, that showing service, that being generous is for me something that's a privilege. And that's the thing that Barnabas communicates by his hurriedness to go and to be a help, is that he communicates what a privilege it is for him to serve. Do you communicate by your facial expression, by your body language, when you're doing an act of service? I remember when we were kids, washing dishes. And you can communicate a lot about how you feel about washing dishes with a towel. And with what you do when you set the dish down, right? How much noise you make in the process. And there were times when my sister and I would be at the sink washing the dishes where there was not a servant heart between the two of us with the way we did it. But there were other times where it was a good spirited, where there was the right kind of feeling in there, where there was the right kind of heart. And when I talk about leading the line to lend a hand, I'm talking about what we communicate with how we serve, with how we care, with how we do. And so you don't have to be, when there is a need, you don't have to be the first in line getting to someone's house. But I tell you what, you ought to be out of breath. I mean, there ought to be, in the way that you serve and the way that you rush to help, there ought to be communicated to the person that's the recipient of that service and that care. Man, they not only have helped, but they loved doing it. Because they know that they matter to you when you serve in that way. And so Barnabas was a master at communicating that kind of service, where people not only experienced kindness and service, but where they knew that the kindness and the service that they experienced was something that was genuinely appreciated, that was genuinely genuinely given. Go, if you would, with me to Acts 11, and I want you to look together with me at one last principle about the matter of being an encourager. Look with me at Acts chapter 11, and read with me there, beginning in verse 22 of Acts 11. This is the story about the church at Antioch that Barnabas went to go and help evangelize. It says, and the news about them, that's the church at Antioch, reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas off to Antioch. Barnabas would be a good guy to send, because he's going to go and encourage those new Christians. And when he had come and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them all with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. For he was a good man and full of the Holy Spirit and of faith, and considerable numbers were brought to the Lord. And he left for Tarsus to go look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. And it came about that for an entire year they met with the church and taught considerable numbers, and the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. question about Barnabas' behavior there with Paul. Here he is preaching at Antioch, and he decides to go to Tarsus and look for Saul to bring him to Antioch to come and preach. Now, why would he go to Tarsus to go find Saul? I mean, why not just send somebody else? Why not write a letter and say, Paul, why don't you come over and help us here? Why go find Paul? What did he want to do there? Well, the reason for going to Tarsus to go find Saul and to bring him to Antioch was the encouragement that's a part of Barnabas going out of his way to involve Paul in the work that was going on there at Antioch. I mean, he could go to the trouble of writing a letter. Someone else could go to the trouble of traveling. But when Barnabas goes away from Antioch to come to Tarsus to come and find Saul, here is Saul. Imagine him in Tarsus, and he's making tents or doing whatever he's doing in Tarsus while he's there. And he looks up on a hot summer's afternoon, and here he sees the familiar gait of someone coming down the street. And he says, Am my eyes deceiving me? I know that guy. And as he gets a little closer, he recognizes, I don't know if Barnabas had a beard or what he looked like, but he begins to see his countenance, and he knows that this is his friend. And they run and embrace each other, and Paul invites him into where he lives, and they sit down together, and they begin to talk and catch up about one another's affairs. And so Paul finally says, well, brother, why have you come? And Barnabas begins telling him the story, spreading good gossip about the work that God is doing at Antioch. And he says to him, brother, you need to come and help us. I think this is the place for you to be. All those Christians that you chased out of Jerusalem when you were persecuting the church, a bunch of them went to Antioch. And they are preaching the word to Gentiles. And maybe this is the purpose that God had in mind for you, is to come work with the people that you used to persecute. And now help to reach out to the people that are the most distant from God, these unclean Gentiles. Come and help me with this. Come participate in this. And Paul, he goes. And the great skill that Barnabas teaches us there in what he does is that he went out of his way. He went out of his way to seek someone else's partnership in the work. When you go out of your way to involve someone in God, someone that's on the fringe, someone who's uninvolved, when you go out of your way to get someone else involved in the Lord's work, you communicate two things to them that are very encouraging. You say to them, I believe in you. I believe in you. And so I came all the way to Tarsus because I believe in you. And you also communicate to them that I need you. I need your help. I can't. We need more people involved, and you've got something that you bring to this that's important. I believe in you and I need you. Is it encouraging to you when someone says those two things to you? When they say to you, I believe in you, when they say to you, I need you, those are encouraging things. And Barnabas said that without saying it. He said it because he went out of his way. There's no more bigger way to communicate those two things than to go out of your way to involve someone else. It's a really encouraging way to behave. Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and to good deeds, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as we see the day drawing near. Barnabas is a great example of what it looks like to stimulate each other to the right kind of motivation to love and to the right kind of behavior to good works. And he provides for us a great picture of what that encouragement looks like. Is there something in that you can pick up, something that you can use so that we can leave our island, so that we can build bridges to those that are on the fringe that are not connected, so that we can spread good gossip about one another, so that we can lead the line to lend a hand, and so that we can be a people who go out of the way to involve one another in the Lord's work? Those are encouraging ways. God help us to be encouragers, to stimulate each other to love and to good works. We're going to sing an invitation song, and it's intended to be encouraging if you've not yet put Jesus on in baptism. If you've not yet experienced the forgiveness of your sins, then today would be a great day to know the Lord's pardon and forgiveness and to be His disciple. Won't you come as together we stand and as we sing?